Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining the 2020 Teacher Leader Summit virtual series. My name is Christina and I will be your session host and moderator. We ask that participants keep microphones and videos off for the remainder of the session, unless specifically asked to turn them on from a presenter. You are attending session A014, Access and Opportunity for Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities, ELA Guidebooks Companion Resources. Allow me to introduce our presenter today, Kelly McClure.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today. We'd like to, again, welcome all of you to today's Teacher Leader Summit session. And as Kristen has said, my name is Kelly McClure, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the department for today's training on the companion resources. Next. Before we formally begin, I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank all of you for being here today. The work you do on behalf of our students is so critical for them and for our larger community. Times are uncertain and even turbulent these days, with both a global pandemic and a national crisis having arrived at our collective front door. Yet we remain hopeful because at our core, educators are optimistic people. Your interest in this work demonstrates just how deeply service and hope, as well as a commitment to social justice and taking care of one another, runs in you. We are profoundly grateful to you. So in today's session, we will explore the ELA Guidebook Companion Resources developed for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Over the past year, the LDOE, edCount, and teacher leaders have engaged in this work to facilitate student access and opportunity to both a high-quality curriculum and the general education curriculum. the general education classroom. Today, we will examine the resources developed to date, how you can use them in your own planning and instruction for next year, and look ahead to how the department will be deepening the work in the coming year. Simple logistics for the webinar are that we will keep everyone on mute, but we will encourage any questions that you have and from time to time your own participation in the chat bar. And as always, everything we talk about here will be available post-session on Louisiana Believes. And this is important because the PowerPoint that has been available up until maybe a few moments ago was a little bit of an older version without some of the updated links. So you'll definitely want to return to the schedule platform and Louisiana Believes for the most up-to-date information. By the way, the bird show in the background is free of charge for this presentation today. Next. As a result of today's session, participants will be able to explain how students with significant cognitive disabilities benefit from access to a high-quality curriculum, collaboration between general and special education teachers, opportunities to learn in inclusive settings. Share with a colleague what the companion resources are, how they were created, and what they do. We'll also begin using the companion resources to create individualized lesson plans that hold high expectations for students with significant cognitive disabilities while providing the appropriate support needed. Next. Our agenda then follows our objectives. After our welcome, we'll be looking at a rationale for the overall program, going deeply into the companion resources themselves, and then looking very briefly at the grade-specific resources currently available, and then we'll do some closing. Next. We start with our rationale, or the why for creating companion resources to the ELA Guidebook for this population of students. Next. The department's academic strategy holds that all students are provided a dignified and respectful opportunity to learn by building knowledge of the world, reading meaningful texts, expressing ideas through writing and speaking, and solving complex problems. We have pursued a policy of providing all students with access and opportunity to learn with a Tier 1 high-quality curriculum. But what has this meant for students with significant cognitive disabilities? To date, there have not been curricula that have been submitted or approved for a Tier 1 curriculum ranking. And many, if not most, of our students with significant cognitive disabilities spend their days in substantially separate settings, accessing curriculum that tend to emphasize more functional skills. The result is that our most vulnerable students are not being taught with the highest quality resources available to all students. Some would argue that the current library of high-quality curricula available on Louisiana Believes are entirely too rigorous for this population of students. And to this we would say, there's a concept in the field of special education known as the least dangerous assumption. It holds that, quote, in the absence of conclusive data, educational decisions should be based on assumptions which, if incorrect, will have the least dangerous effect on the student. Said in more positive and practical terms, this principle holds that one should, in the absence of rock-solid evidence to the contrary, presume competence rather than non-competence in our students. Take a moment to reflect on the often stated vision of the department, and let's make just a slight modification to it. Quote, all students, including those with the most significant cognitive disabilities, deserve an education that prepares them to be independent and successful in life after high school. The question then becomes, at present, does the instruction available across the state assume that all students can, will, and should be taught with Tier 1 curriculum with high expectations and in the least restrictive environment? If we are to adhere to the principle of the least dangerous assumption and presume competence for students with significant cognitive disabilities, as educators, we must also value providing age and grade appropriate content and the least restrictive opportunities to ensure that students with significant needs be included in grade level settings and participate to the extent possible in grade level core curriculum. This vision is based on the guiding principle that students have both a legal and a moral right to access core curricula. It is a vision that demands equity for these students throughout their educational careers. And it is a vision that can be more fully realized with increased educator understanding of how, rather than whether, to create access to the general curriculum in English language arts. Next. Many will question, can this population of students succeed at a high level? Let's look at just one slice of data. The data that are summarized here speak to the range of ability and academic competency of students with significant cognitive disabilities. The Learner Characteristics Inventory delineates 5 reading categories for students who participate in the alternate assessment across the country. Take a moment to take in what a study found by Bauer and colleagues. Taken together, if you look across the bullets, across all of the states, almost 85% of students with significant cognitive disabilities have some awareness of print or Braille, and a full 65% can read basic sight words, read with fluency and literal understanding, and or with fluency and critical understanding in print or Braille. This says nothing of their ability to understand the spoken word or graphic representations of text. Obviously, this has positive implications for English language arts instruction for these students. Through the right types of accommodations and modifications, students can access and retain the big ideas of complex text. This also means that through the guidebook companion resources, educators can bridge. This also means that through the guidebook companion resources, educators can bridge complex text and support literacy development for students with a range of abilities. All of this is built on the foundation provided by the high-quality curriculum found in the ELA Guidebook. Students with significant cognitive disabilities can benefit from working from this foundation of vertically aligned, research and best practice-based ELA curriculum, just as all students do. Next. How do students with significant cognitive disabilities benefit from collaboration between general education and special education teachers? This includes expertise with content-specific teaching and learning, expertise with supporting students with complex needs, dismantling of the my students versus your students divide that often happens, and promoting inclusion. Another benefit to consider for students with significant cognitive disabilities is the development of expertise for both of the teachers, the cross-transference that happens when they work together. The guidebook specifically provide the platform for effective collaboration between these types of educators. It provides a platform for collaborative planning and implementation of instructional units, lessons, and assessments by developing an understanding of the academic concepts and vocabulary that's included in the lessons, learning how to modify lessons using supports and scaffolds and effective instructional strategies to teach students the concepts, knowledge, and skills related to the lessons, and discovering ways to transfer and generalize the content, knowledge, and skills to new texts. In this way, general educators learn from the expertise of special educators in defining and creating appropriate scaffolds and supports, and in a similar vein, special educators deepen their own content expertise and domain-specific pedagogy in working with those steeped so deeply in the content. All students benefit when their instruction is viewed through the lens of equity and inclusion. When teachers work together, all students receive the benefit of intentional, differentiated planning, as well as multiple adults available for modeling and support. Additionally, students with disabilities enjoy greater access to the greater school environment as a whole, and other students enjoy greater access to the diversity of individuals among them. Which brings us to the benefits of inclusion. This final aspect of benefits that led us to the work of the companion resources has to do with having an aligned high-quality curriculum and what that yields, as well as the opportunities for inclusion. It is important to understand and reflect on what has happened within special education over the past decades with respect to inclusion, because the field has changed so dramatically due to laws that have been enacted and a growing body of research. The history of education in the United States follows the pattern of ever greater means and methods of including greater numbers of students, whether gender, socioeconomic, class, race, ethnicity, geography, and yes, special education, all within public education. Once legislation began in the 1970s, a steady stream of mandates, laws, and decisions presented special needs students with new opportunities. The 1970s brought more significant improvements to the lives of special education students than any other decade in special education history, guaranteeing the civil rights to all disabled people and required accommodations for disabled students in schools. Students who were allowed to attend public schools were often placed into special classrooms that separated them from the rest of the student body and failed to support their specific learning needs. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 guaranteed a free and appropriate education for all students. The law articulated a compelling national mission to improve access to education for children with disabilities. During the 1970s, students with significant cognitive disabilities received instruction based on their developmental age. This resulted in students receiving instruction on skills that were not age appropriate, such as pulling a toy, finding hidden blocks, and imitating sounds. Students obviously did not make much progress. In the mid-1970s and into the 80s, there was a change to a functional curriculum approach. The use of a functional curriculum is still quite important. Functional skills prepare students for their homes, communities, and jobs. Instruction focused on teaching life skills, anything that has everyday application, and teaching to independence. These skills are still valued in the field of education. However, when students are only following a functional curriculum, the opportunities for a full educational experience are not gained, for example, with literacy skills. As time went on, further amendments and legislation were added to ensure that early intervention services in 1986, the inclusion of students with autism and traumatic brain injuries in 1990, and transition services in 1997. The 80s seemed to focus on social inclusion. This model of inclusion was added to the functional curriculum. Social inclusion is based on the premise that all students should have an opportunity to become full members in their schools and communities. This provides opportunities to establish peer relations and build communication skills. However, students were not being taught academic content. Another model was added to the functional curriculum in the 1990s, self-determination, that students needed to have a stronger influence in their own educational careers. For example, they became active members in their IEP teams and contributed to goal setting and person-centered planning. During the 1990s through present time, general education access has been added to the functional curriculum model, social inclusion, and self-determination. This has changed the field as well. Due to recent federal mandates and research, the field has moved toward creating access to general curriculum. So though a bit lengthy, this brief walk through history is, to me, a story of hope. And it is a story that continues to expand. Keeping pace with the law, educational research, and best practice have demonstrated that students with even the most significant disabilities are capable of learning much more academic content than once thought possible. Since the highest academic expectation for any student is that he or she will be able to interact and then meet with grade level expectations, students with disabilities should, whenever possible, have the same opportunity to reach grade level achievement articulated for all students. The foundation of a quality, individualized education is an accepting, unrestricted environment with access to the general curriculum has created more opportunities for students with significant cognitive disabilities to be independent and successful in life after high school, which is in keeping with our vision. Next. Today, students with significant cognitive disabilities typically receive instruction across a range of settings, but tend to be concentrated by and large in self-contained settings. In a 2001 study, teachers reported that students were placed in self-contained special education classrooms with what they refer to as, quote, special, mostly symbolic or social inclusion. Only an additional 10% were in the same setting with some opportunities for, quote, academic inclusion. In total, 5% of students split their time between a resource room and general education, and full inclusion in general education classes and or collaborative settings with general and special education teachers was provided for only 3% of students. This is not to argue inclusion for inclusion's sake. The National Longitudinal Transition Study examined the outcomes of 11,000 students with a range of disabilities and found that more time spent in general education classrooms was positively correlated with fewer absences from school, fewer referrals for disruptive behavior, and better outcomes after high school in the areas of employment and independent living. In addition, the research tells us that when students with disabilities are included in general education instruction, they have more access to general education, general curriculum and effective instructional methods. They achieve at higher rates of academic performance, particularly in literacy, and they acquire better social and behavioral outcomes. And when included in general education classrooms, students with severe cognitive disabilities can benefit from a variety of instructional arrangements that are already found in general education classrooms, including individual, small group, large group, and partner or peer learning. Students with severe intellectual disabilities can benefit from instruction in these same arrangements. This inclusive placement practice provides opportunities for students with disabilities to experience many positive outcomes, and studies show that peers without disabilities also experience a positive academic and social impact. Participation in general education lessons allows special education teachers to benchmark their students to typical peers, providing greater opportunities for educators and family members to raise their expectations in terms of projected educational outcomes for the learners with the most significant needs. It also affords educators with more and better prospects to make least restrictive environment determinations, because it is now possible for students to receive instruction in a variety of settings, including the regular classroom, thanks to an aligned curriculum. These are positive outcomes and are consistent with our vision for educating students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Next. So in review, we've enumerated the benefits of the approach we have taken in creating the aligned companion resources to the ELA Guidebooks. The first has to do with a high-quality curriculum. Take a moment now and reflect on the implication for your students. In the chat bar, I'd like to ask all of you to let us know what you think about how students with significant cognitive disabilities benefit from access to a high-quality curriculum. Kristen, would you like to highlight anything you are seeing in the chat bar?
I do have a question that had come up from Jennifer. Should the special education teachers use this with special education? If they're using this as well as regular education teachers, are they being trained in this? She says she knows that special education teachers say that they struggle helping with classwork because they're not trained in the guidebooks.
It's a great question. I'm so glad that, Jennifer, that you brought this up. These companion resources are developed specifically for students with the most significant needs. And so these are the students who have been identified for the alternate assessment. They are significantly modified, which is very different from the wider spectrum of students with many varieties of disabilities. And so the answer to the question is, I would not be recommending these resources to be used by special education teachers for the broader special education population. And I agree with you that if we could get all of our special education teachers trained in the guidebooks through the variety of mechanisms that I believe we have through the department, I think that would be great for all students. I do not believe that this will be the starting place. And so I believe that what these resources bank on is that that type of training with the guidebook is done in conjunction with the use of these resources, and or working in coordination with a highly skilled, experienced ELA general ed teacher who is quite familiar with the work of the guidebook. Are there any other, sorry?
We also have several comments coming in. Catherine, Alana, Kimberly all agree that this better prepares them for post-secondary life. Ashley says they're better equipped to participate in the community post-high school and have a better quality of life.
Great, so I'll put a second question to the participants and again ask you in the chat bar if you could tell us how you think our students would benefit from the collaboration between the general ed and the special education teachers. And by special education, I am speaking specifically about those who teach the students with the most significant needs.
And you can pose all the comments. I know that they're coming to me privately where it says LDOE presenter. That's totally fine. I'm reading them for the presenter for us today.
Correct, and just so everyone knows, I am unable to see the chat bar unless you send me a private message. So thank you, Kristen, for moderating and curating for us as well. Do we have anything interesting popping up in the chat bar with regard to collaboration?
We do. I see from Jenny that they gain instruction and strategies from the people who are experts in the topic. And Nellie says, as a general ed teacher, teaching special education students, I feel much more prepared to understand what can be expected from the students. Also, Callie says that students will benefit from different teaching types and information. And collaboration between the two educators allows for greater understanding of how to meet the students' needs.
So I'll add the third and final question here for this section, which I feel will probably get some pretty passionate responses. But the question for the audience to think about is how you believe your students could benefit from participation in greater inclusive settings. So if you would put your thoughts once again in the chat bar, how will they benefit from inclusive settings?
We have from Kimberly, students benefit from teacher collaboration and that the expert instruction from two different teachers with different experiences and understanding of how to teach the students. And they can collaborate with peers. Ashley says she believes her students will perform better and develop better communication skills by interacting with their peers. Rebecca says students will be exposed to higher order thinking skills. And Jenny says my classroom is limited in resources, materials, but also varying levels of peer interactions. Amanda says collaboration in the classroom also leads to compassion, which is something we need.
Well, on that lovely note, I will transition us to the second section, which is an overview now of the companion resources. So we began this segment, the session with a rationale for why we believe this work to be so very important for our students and even for our own continued development as teachers. We've also looked more closely at students with significant cognitive disabilities who require access and opportunity to learn grade level content using a high quality curriculum in the least restrictive environment. So this next section is going to introduce the companion resources that we've been working on for the past academic year. And our objective in this section is to give you all a sense of what the companion resources are, how they were created, and what they can do for you, as well as what they can't, just to be clear. So next. So the goal of this project from the beginning has been to create companion resources to the ELA Guidebook in order to facilitate access and opportunity with a high-quality curriculum, improve professional learning between content area specialists and expert teachers of special education students, and increase options for students to participate in an inclusive, least restrictive environment. I will bet that by the end of this, you will be able to go back to your school and repeat these 3 refrains quite handily. Next, the deliverables of this project, however, were in grades 3 through 8, we took the ELA guidebooks as they stand, and for each one of them, there are 4 or 5 units per grade. For each unit, there is a unit overview, an assessment overview, section overviews, and lesson overviews. And in a moment, we're going to go through and talk about exactly what that means. But first, next, I wanted to say a word or two about what companion resources can and cannot do. Because before we introduce you to the layout and thinking behind those resources, we just want to be really clear about their utility and clear about that the teacher's work, as always, is yet to be done. So we know that the resources are developed in a way that can access, that can facilitate access with a high quality curriculum, facilitate the collaboration, and increase opportunities for the least restrictive environment. We also have here that they serve as a starting point for instructional unit and lesson planning for these students. What these companion resources cannot do is that they cannot be perfect for every single student in every situation. Each lesson we deliver, and you all know this, is based on the unique needs of individuals and has to take into consideration where the student is starting, what his or her goals are, and what supports are most effective in supporting him or her toward those goals. There simply was no way that we could create a centralized body of resources that is perfectly applicable out of the box for every single individual student across the state of Louisiana. And so what we did was create a centralized cadre of resources that all teachers could draw from. So just to be clear, these resources cannot and should not be implemented without further modification and thinking on the teacher's part in order to tailor to students' individual needs. I think that goes without saying, but we wanted to say it just the same. And so let me introduce you to what the companion resources look like. Next. So if you're familiar with the ELA Guidebook, each one of them comes with essentially a unit overview. Each one of the units in the guidebook is organized with very specific components, and all of them are the same across the guidebook. Each unit begins with a fully articulated unit overview. This overview summarizes the overall plan and key components of the particular unit of study. You can think of the unit overview as the Cliff Notes for the entire unit, including what grade, the texts that are used, overall descriptions, the essential question, and the culminating tasks. Next. What our team did over the past year was to take what we called these scopes for the existing ELA guidebook and modify them for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And we did this by creating essentially a side-by-side template that you see here on the screen. Let me say a few words about this modification. As we saw in the previous section on instruction for students with significant cognitive disabilities, each student is unique with specific learning differences addressed in their individual IEP. So of course it would be folly to think that we could create one modified plan that's going to work perfectly for all students. So the aim of this project became to create a bridge between the ELA guidebooks as they currently stand and currently designed, and the eventual individual detailed lesson plans that will be required for each student. the example before you now is just one of 4 parts of the work that we did in moving from the scope of the ELA Guidebook to the modified version for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And so this example that you see here is one of the 4 parts of what this will look like at this bridge or higher planning and level of thinking. Next. The second piece is that it includes the assessment overview. The culminating assessment drives the overall unit planning in the guidebook. And generally, for the purposes of the companion resources, we modified the culminating writing task only and left the other 2 tasks, such as the cold read task, as optional. The reason for this decision was, first, to essentialize the work of the overall unit. We wanted to get to the essence and core of the work that was driving the ELA Guidebook unit. The second was to create a single focal point for the modified section and lesson plans. And the third was to allow for the discretion of individual teachers like yourselves with respect to other portions of the assessment. So in other words, if you were to read through these assessments in their original form and decide that your student is ready for something more than just the modified culminating task, then the cold read and the other tasks would be available for you to modify. But in our planning for the modifications here, we focused on the singular culminating task. Next. The third section of the companion resources is the section overview. And the section overviews describe the discrete subsections of the overall unit plan. For the purposes of the companion resources, we mostly modified the assessment and additional support portions of each section. We also modified the section length or number of lessons based on the modifications we made here and in the individual lesson plan. Next. The fourth section of the companion resources is the lesson overviews. The lesson overviews describe at a high level the plan for each individual day of instruction. And for the purposes of the companion resources, we modified the descriptions, the expressions, the look-fors, and materials from the original guidebook scopes. Next. A final note on some of the section and lesson overviews. In some cases, we left a lesson and even a section as optional. In other cases, we left all the lessons within one section optional, which made, of course, the section optional. The reason we would do this, and that you will be making similar decisions for your own students as you use these resources, has to do once more with the culminating task of the unit and essentializing the content required for students with significant cognitive disabilities. As one example, Section 11 from the Giver unit is anchored in a cold reading task, which we had made optional from the outset of the unit plan. Thus, Section 11 in the Giver, as well as the associated lesson plans 44 and 45, were something that we made optional. We left the optional sections as they were, though we fade them out a bit in gray and in italics, as you can see here, so that teachers who will eventually be referencing the companion resources will both see the logic of what stays and goes in our original modifications, but also make individual determinations about whether to reincorporate those sections based on the students with whom they work. So I'd like to introduce you, and before I do, I'd like to say, Kristen, I see we have a few questions coming in. I'm going to go have everyone meet the 3 teams. And if you could put those questions in the chat bar to me, then I'll be happy to address them once we get to the other side. So for the 3rd grade team, here I wanted to give you a sense now that I've given you the overview of the companion resources, but give you a more concrete sense of how our teams both thought about the work, as well as the additional thinking that it spurred for them in taking these lessons even further in their individual classrooms. So in order to do that, we wanted to highlight a bit of the work and thinking of a few of our teams. So the first is our third grade team from Cato Parish, and that would be Jada Woods and Kiana Reinhardt. I believe that they are here and present with us now. If you two could unmute yourself. I see Jada.
Hello.
Hi. And Kiana, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome. So both of you, thank you so much for your work here, and to all of the participants. Our third grade team has been really strong and has produced some amazing work. They were going to start us off just telling us a little bit. I think Jada will start with you. Can you give us a sense of like how you thought about the work as we went through it?
The first thing we thought about was how to align the LEAP connectors. The way we determined that was by aligning each lesson with its corresponding standard. You can find those standards on the Learn Zillion Standard Overview tab on the Learn Zillion unit at a glance. And also we included, because it's kind of hard to find activities, we also included a link to the elementary essential cards. And on those cards, it gives you another resource for activities while planning. And I think by doing this for teachers, we have cut down on planning time, especially when it comes to teachers who are unfamiliar with the LEAP connectors or where to find them.
Perfect. Kiana, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I had the task of actually learning the expectations that students with particular severe cognitive disabilities actually have. I work more with the general ed population, and Ms. Woods worked with the actual students that do have these disabilities. So as we were going through and working, of course, we're taking the existing curriculum, but we're actually having to think about, in her mind as a teacher that works with these particular students, in my mind that works with the general ed students, a way that we can come together and meet in the middle and meet the expectations. As noted, we had some sections that we did leave that were optional, and even within sections that were not completely optional, we did leave some lessons that were optional. And again, that's to leave it at the discretion of the teachers as they go through and look at what they want to teach. Do they think that the students are able to meet the goals of that lesson, or do they want to actually take some of the other lessons out as well? One of the things that we did have to do, for example, anyone that's familiar with guidebooks knows that there's a lot of writing embedded into the curriculum. So for some of the tasks that we did actually either modify the amount of work. We took it down from a multi-paragraph essay to maybe a single paragraph essay using text evidence stems or sentence starters to help the students actually write the essay, or to go through and write maybe a 3 to 5 sentence response, not necessarily in paragraph form, just to let the students still meet the goal of the lesson, but not necessarily have to have something as extensive as a multi-paragraph essay.
That's terrific. I really appreciate you guys jumping on to talk us through that. So some alignment issues with the connectors and looking at the standards was one takeaway. Certainly determining the activities was another. So thank you both. I'd like to switch now to the next slide, which is on the 5th grade team. And just want to see if Renee was able to join us.
I believe there is a connection issue there.
Okay. So let me try to speak on her behalf. The 5th grade team actually has worked from St. Charles Parish. That includes Rondell Roberts and Renee DiGirolamo. I'm so sorry about just, yes, massacring that name. Are you there? No. Okay. But one thing I realized that I hadn't noticed as our last team was introducing themselves is that for this project, we had teams for each of the grades 3 through 8. And the representation was within, the teachers are working from the same schools. And there is one ELA general ed teacher as well as one teacher of students with significant cognitive disabilities. And so that is true across all of our teams. And so for Rondell and Renee's team, they submitted a few snippets here that you can see on the screen to talk a little bit about what they learned. And so what they have been talking about in preparation for today is that in planning the activities, they started or continued and sort of deepened their thinking about multiple modes of communicating student understanding. And so Renee in particular created these same 3 resources around the same topic, but for different modalities, and pushing students to write, to type, to cut and paste, to vocalize, to circle or highlight items, and providing students with multiple ways to comprehend the material while maintaining structure from lesson to lesson, and then in that way being able to give students more opportunities to be successful. She also thought a lot about utilizing formats that are similar to the LEAP Connect, especially for the culminating writing tasks, because embedded in those writing tasks are opportunities, or the way that the LEAP Connect is constructed, there are actually some excellent instructional practices embedded within it. So she has been providing her students with templates and answer options and having them practice communicating on responses to prompts and so forth. So this is just a small array of how the work sort of deepened Renee's thinking in particular. Now to the next slide, which is our 8th grade team. And our 8th grade team is represented by Misty Fontenot and Holly Denise Atchinson. Are you guys available and unmuted?
Yes, ma'am, we are. We're here.
Excellent. So welcome, and I'd love to just ask you guys the same sort of question as a result of the work that you've done with these companion resources. How are you thinking differently about the text that you've been using?
While working on the modified units, it became apparent how important it was to scaffold instruction, yet maintain text complexity for our students. When considering the scaffolds for the ELA guidebooks, I couldn't help but to think about the structured ways to support my students using the 4 tiers of questioning suggested by the LEAP Connect assessments. Providing reading materials written at different levels allows my students with reading disabilities the opportunity to learn about the same topics and content as the rest of the class, while providing the appropriate supports to ensure that they are successful. For some students, the content may be delivered verbally, but students have strengths in different areas. Others may be able to gather information visually on the internet. Using various techniques to introduce new material provides my students with greater access to the material and greater opportunities to understand and retain it. And while sometimes I found adapted text at different levels, most of the time I do find that I have to create it myself.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you. And for you, Denise, when you were creating materials and participating in this and sort of making them at differentiated levels, which of the resources did you find helpful?
BoardMaker is our go-to when differentiating level 1 and 2 texts and activities. It is a comprehensive solution designed to encourage student success. It is a special education platform that supports education and communication of students. It is actually really simple. We always maintain consistency by always selecting the same picture for the corresponding word. Yes, it's because there are so many pictures to choose from. Whether I am writing a picture book, creating flashcards, or making an interactive activity, the complexity found in the ELA guidebooks is always most important. I never want to lose focus on the complexity while also supplying my students with what they need to succeed at the highest level possible. It is evident that no one text is perfect for all students, so we took the approach of providing guidance to the field about how to find or adapt text based on the specific needs of our own individual students. And we will put a link in the chat bar now and at the end of this presentation for those who would be interested in reading this resource.
Thank you for that. So it looks like the link is now in the chat bar, and this is a resource that is now available in the library on the Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities page. Though I think if you click on this link as is, it's going to take you straight to this document. And, you know, this was sort of one of the lessons learned right up front in our creation of the companion resources this year. When we started, we here, like at least on my part, kind of foolishly thought, oh, we'll find, you know, a perfect place where there are differentiated texts at different levels created for, you know, all the great books. And we'll be able to just access those, and then we're going to link them for everyone in Louisiana to be able to use alongside the guidebook. And of course, as you've just said, Denise, that no one text winds up being perfect for students, and of course, nobody has yet gotten into the business of attempting that type of approach. So instead, what we did, and what you'll see in the companion resources, are these links that say adapted version of text. And there are a compendium that you can pull from of different, you know, grade spans, different varieties, different types of text. But there are also ways for you to continue to modify text in ways that are most useful for your students. And so that's what that resource was created for, but just one of the additional lessons learned. And so I'd like to acknowledge, I do see some of the questions that are here in the chat bar, and it looks like we are actually going in the direction of answering all of these in the next few slides. So if you'll hang with us a bit, we're going to get to where you can find these things and so forth. But before I leave this section, on the next slide, I just wanted, since you had the opportunity to meet some of the teams that worked on this project, we'd be remiss in not naming all of the others. So I've had the distinct honor and privilege to work with these outstanding educators from across our state over this past academic year. And they've been an amazing mix of general education, ELA specialists, and special education specialists working with students with some of the most complex needs. So this teacher leader cohort has been absolutely integral to the companion resources that we are about to unveil. And I want to take this opportunity to thank them most deeply for their work. Their dedication, your dedication, for those of you who are here, has been inspiring to me and keeps the work grounded. We have also had the good fortune to work with our partners at edCount, Charlene Turner and Jean Clayton. If you don't know the organization edCount, a significant part of their work reflects their focus on state and federal policy issues pertaining to education of students with disabilities writ large, effective instructional practices for this particular student population, and the appropriate inclusion and accommodations for all students in education assessment. So their partnership has provided us with both the theoretical and practical-based support that we've needed to create such a robust and rigorous resource for all of our students, and we thank them deeply. So next, at this point in the presentation, we had wanted to, let's say, send you to breakout rooms where we would be able to dive very deeply into one grade level unit for every grade. Unfortunately, the platform could not support this. So we are thinking about doing this later in summer when every single one of these are available. So stay tuned on that number. We just couldn't do it with the number of people participating today. So in this place, I'm going to very briefly give you an overview of the resources that are available right now on Louisiana Believes, as well as those that are coming in the ensuing month or two before school opens in August. Next. So at present, we currently have 1 unit per grade available on the Louisiana Believes website. And these include, for grade 3, the unit on Louisiana Purchase. Grade 4 is the Lightning Thief. Grade 5 is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Grade 6 is If Stones Could Speak. Grade 7 is Behind the Scenes. And grade 8 is the unit on the Telltale Heart. So we've made these available now in order for the field to be able to dive deeply into this one resource for the grade in which you teach. And by doing so, we hope it's going to give you a more concrete sense of exactly what the companion resources will look like for your grade. Now, the full suite of companion resources are going to be available for all guidebook units, grades 3 to 8. So I repeat, if there are 5 units in your grade, grade 5, then those will be ready in time before school starts in August. And those will all be located in the same place on Louisiana Believes. And again, that's in the library section of the Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities page, and we've put it right at the top so that you cannot miss it. The other pieces that I would ask, if you're here today, at the end I'm going to give an email address, our new Diverse Learners email address, and I would love to ask if you are not already on the listserv for what we refer to as the Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities cohort, then I would love to ask you to let us know that you'd like to be added, because then you will receive notification for when all of these resources go live on Louisiana Believes, as well as be part of our more routine communications about guidance and resources that come out with respect to this population of students. So there important information that I also want to say up front in making these available at this point. These current versions of the companion resources are what we are considering for what we're considering the pilot year for the resources, and that is for 2020 and 2021. So starting this fall, this begins a pilot of these companion resources. And that means, quite simply, that these are what we consider to be in draft form. And they are not perfect, and they are not in finalized, beautiful, graphically detailed form. However, we wanted to go ahead and push forward and make them public now for a couple of reasons. And the first is out of a recognition, as we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, for the fact that there is a dearth of high-quality resources available to students with significant cognitive disabilities. We're clear on that, and so we didn't want to hold back just because we couldn't get them to a beautiful, perfect place. The second piece, though, is critical, and that is because we want to spend this next year beta testing this version of the companion resources this year. So we've essentially been operating a bit like a small group of people in classrooms, in schools across the state, but in very small pods. And so what we would like to do is kind of kick the tires now on these resources. And so what I mean by that is for everyone who elects to use these resources in the coming academic year, we're going to hope to collect data from you about your experiences, your plans, your recommendations, your questions, and even ask you for sample plans and student artifacts that come out of the work. So you essentially become part of the beta testing group And what we want to do is obviously use all of this information in order to iterate on the companion resources themselves, because in their current form, we want to be able to make them even better, and we know that we can, and we can make them stronger, so that we can create more finalized versions by this time next year. And then once the full suite of resources are available, meaning the full suite of these draft companion resources are available over the next couple of months, we're going to add a survey tool so that when you access these, we're going to be able to capture your experiences and feedback as you use them and implement. It's not going to be a heavy-handed, you know, lots of data, lots of surveys, and so forth. But we do want to get a sense, you know, are you really using them? To what extent? What's getting in the way? What's helping? How do we make it better, and so forth. And so that is our big caveat. So again, you can imagine there will be draft across the head of each one of these. And so if you find mistakes, then you need to let us know. And if you find ways to make them better, do the same. So I see additional questions coming in. I'm going to take those at the end because I'm still going to address a few of these that I see here. So let's talk next steps, and hopefully I can answer any additional questions. Next. So before we start closing out, based on today's session, I want to challenge each one of you who is on the call in order to ensure that you carry this work forward. So I'm going to pose this question to you, and once again, I'd ask you to put a few ideas in the chat bar of what 2 or 3 concrete actions you will take based on everything you've learned during this lesson. And I want you to think as generatively as possible. Maybe you're going to go back to your colleagues and talk with them about the imperative for trying out greater instances of inclusion in general ed. Or maybe you're going to reach out to a content teacher and ask if it's possible to work together on a few lessons. And maybe you're a general education teacher who's here and want to convey information that you've heard today to your colleagues and make a plan for next steps. It could be quite possible that maybe you want to get right into the task of thinking about your own students and making plans for the fall. All of that is awesome. Just add at least 1 or 2 concrete actions that you would like to take, and then I'll ask Kristen to sort of curate for us once again to what people are willing to commit to.
I see from Nellie, continue. Oh, wait, hold on. It went away. Continue to work on better utilizing the recommendations in the classroom by modifying lesson plans. Callie says reaching out to content teachers to see when we could come into the classroom to participate with non-disabled peers. Darlene says, as the curriculum leader on campus, she will convey this valuable information with her SPED teachers to begin summer planning.
Awesome. So let's go to the next slide. So looking forward to 2020, 2021. The department has a few action items of its own for the coming academic year, and frankly, we're thrilled. Through the work of teacher leader advisors, the department will be building resources for students with significant cognitive disabilities in English language arts and mathematics. So the projects for next year include a realignment of Louisiana connectors for high school mathematics, producing and delivering aligned lessons, creating case studies, and refining and finalizing the companion resources for all ELA Guidebook units grades 3 to 8. That's what we've talked about today. And then also, which has been one of the questions I've seen here in the chat bar, to begin strategic planning processes for companion resources like these in mathematics, as well as for ELA Guidebooks in the high school realm. So we've been waiting for the ELA Guidebook to get over the finish line. And so we need to create like the planning process for what that's going to look like at high school, because it will be different. But we also have the question of mathematics and what's going to make the most sense to the field. And I can tell you, as we've begun the early stages of thinking about that process, we are going to rely heavily on frontline teachers for helping us think about what are the things that are most useful and necessary for you. So there will be a fairly deep needs analysis, I believe, in the first couple of months for thinking about how we would go about this work, particularly in mathematics, you know, depending on that there are different curricula used across the state and so forth. So there's lots to think through, but we're very excited. The department is extremely dedicated to this work, and we're really making strong gains, very proud of where we're going. We, of course, do not yet have the high school, you know, there's so much that has not been done, and we recognize that this is just our first step. No, we do not have, you know, K-3 or K-2 resources. We don't have high school resources in ELA, not yet. We don't have them in mathematics or the other content areas, not yet. But this, hopefully, if we do this right and well, then we will get the information we need to continue to broaden and expand the work. Let's go to the next slide and final slide. And so I'll take questions. I'll go back through chat here in just a second and see if there's any final questions. But just want to note these few final things before that happens. And the first is there's a survey, and it's important. I know that everyone asks you for a survey, but on the scheduling app, it's very easy to access. We need you to let us know what you have thought of today's webinar, what you think about the work that we've done here, and continue to give us feedback on what you believe to be the most critical supports you need for your work with students with significant cognitive disabilities. So communicate, communicate, communicate. It's important. We read it. We do things with it. The second is, your next step will be in designing and implementing lessons based on the companion resources for 2020 and 2021. And we would like you to strongly consider sharing any results and questions, anything that comes up along the way with our team. And the way you can do that, third, is by staying connected through our cohort listserv. So if you are not yet on that listserv, and you would know because you'd receive like monthly emails from me, and if you're not, then you want to send an email to diverselearnersupport@la.gov in order to join. So a couple of other pieces, and then I'll make sure I hit these questions. One is that tomorrow applications are due for our TLAs who will be doing this work. If Kristen, you could go to the previous slide once more. Yeah. So all of this work needs to be done, and we need amazing people to help us do it. And so we're working on the planning now. There is a teacher leader application that is currently available. Applications are due tomorrow. So if you are interested in any way in participating in this work and believe that you have value add to give to the project in terms of content expertise or specialization in working with this population of students, then I would urge you to consider applying. It's going to be exciting. We've had a very tightly knit group, many of whom will be returning with us next year, and many more who will be joining. If you can hang on just a moment, I will grab the link for that application and get it into the chat bar. Let me see let me make sure other questions are getting asked or answered, sorry. Yeah, so again, for pre-K 3 and 4-year-olds, as well as high school, they will certainly not be available in this coming year, but again, we're doing sort of exploratory processes on thinking about how we continue to grow the work that we're starting this year. Yes, we can share a link to the library, and I will do that as well. And the question I see here, is there a non-draft version of the 5th grade unit? So everything is draft, right? But it is a full version of the 5th grade unit, absolutely. So let me spend a moment. Kristen, if you could grab any other questions and put them in the chat for me, and if I'm going to go ahead and close out the session, and anyone who wants the links can stay on. But before everyone starts to hop off, I want to thank my colleagues from edCount and all of our teacher leader advisors for the tremendous amount of love and sweat and tears that they've poured into these resources, because we would not be where we are today without each of them. It's been a distinct pleasure being with all of you today and hearing about the work that you do now and in the future. We look forward to continuing great things. Our best wishes, and please stay connected through at least that diverse learner support email. If you'll hold on just a minute, I will get you the link for the application as well as the link for Louisiana Believes. Okay, Kristen, I'm putting the first link is for Louisiana Believes, and if everyone follows this first link, you'll see at the very top of the page the companion resources, and then again, 1 unit per grade. Let me know if you do not see that, Catherine. All right, now I'm, so it looks like the Believes is in the chat bar, and now I will the link for the application. 1 second. All right, Kristen, I've put the application link in there. See if you can share that with everyone.
I believe those links are going to everyone.
Perfect. And there's a couple of other questions that I can respond to here that have come in. The first one is, are there any suggestions on what to do with the optional lessons? Should we use the extended time on previous lessons or front-loading future lessons? And so that's a great point that we did not cover. So obviously, if a unit is 40 days for the gen ed unit, and we've reduced it to say, 18, then that should give you a longer amount, extended time to work on the particular modified lessons that are now part of those modified units. And then you can use that time either to pull in optional lessons. You can use that time to extend the lessons that you're already teaching if you need more time. You can use that time also, as you said, to front load content or skills that they need. And so I think it's really up to the individual teacher. It is by design that we tried to whittle away and kind of, again, essentialize the content so there would be more time for teachers to operate in planning for students these units. The second question is, just to clarify, you said that companion documents for all units will be available before August. That is accurate. There may be a glitch with one or two of them, but if they are, it's one of the ones that has sort of the final unit of the year, like the 5th unit, and there's 2 choices. And that is just because of the availability of scopes and so forth. But we will have companion resources available, grades 3 to 8, all of the units. That is accurate. So that is it. Hopefully both of those chats are in. If someone could chat me privately just to let me know that you see both links in the chat bar, that would be amazing. We just want to make sure that we've given it to everyone. And then once again, I'll give you a plug that always contact us at the Diverse Learners Support at la.gov. If you want to join the cohort, and I see that you do see the links, Nicole, so thank you so much. I really would love for you guys, if you have any inclination whatsoever, to look at the projects we're considering for next year and to think about joining our group as TLAs, at least give the application some consideration. It's been terrific work, and I think it has deepened the practice of those of us participating in it. And so we want great minds as much as we can. So again, thank you to everyone. Have an amazing summer, and again, thank you for all of the work that you do on behalf of our students.